Water. It's a substance more vital to life than any other, but it is also a resource many of us take for granted. Americans use tens of gallons of water every day without even thinking about it. But for many people, clean water is not so accessible. In some places, tap water is not safe to drink, and in other places, there isn't any running water at all. But this does not have to be the case. Students at Rutgers University are working together to empower developing communities through Engineers Without Borders USA. Starting in 2005, Engineers Without Borders USA Rutgers has been working to build a better world and have had successful partnerships with communities in 4 continents. This is their story.
All right. Well, actually, I was approached by Dorothy Morales in my junior year, and she asked me, "Would you like to start up an EWB chapter at Rutgers?" And I had no idea what that meant or what that entailed. But together, we put together a charter and submitted to EWB USA, and lo and behold, we were approved. That was the easy part. Then we went to the EGC, said, hey, we'd like to establish a chapter, and they said, sure, no problem. We got Dean Brown at the time, which I think is a different Dean Brown than you currently have, to be our mentor. But again, he was a mentor for many different organizations. So as far as adult supervision and mentorship, we didn't have a lot of guidance. So we did our best. We put together our first meeting, and it was a great turnout. We had about 20 or 30 people show up just because the thought of EWB, this Engineers Without Borders, going overseas to bring engineering and volunteer work and helping out, less fortunate communities, it just has such a great ring to it. And we really naively thought that momentum, that energy of that first meeting would really help us cross any boundary, any obstacle. We were a little wrong. And so the first meeting was great, a lot of energy. When we had our second meeting, kind of left us scratching our heads saying, all right, what next? What do we do? So we looked online, looked for some guidance, and we found some projects that EWB USA was offering. So we submitted a project to Uganda and Macedonia for some water purification systems. And of course, EWB USA took one look at this application from a new chapter and said, no, you guys don't have the experience or the expertise to successfully execute this project. So we were a little dashed, we were a little disappointed at that news. But fortunately, one of our non-engineer members had mentioned EWB to her African studies teacher, who was already in the midst of planning a trip to Kenya to install some rain harvesting systems. The project was already funded by some local churches, and as engineers, we could go there to do community outreach and help with the implementation of the project. Sounded great. It was right up our alley. So we went ahead, and it was a great experience for us all to help ground EWB Rutgers chapter and gain some momentum. The other two projects, we helped out with the first Hurricane Katrina relief down in New Orleans. And that was a harrowing experience, to say the least. And we were helping out the lower Ninth Ward district, one of the poorest and heavily hit of New Orleans. And we went into these houses and gutted the houses. So, they were just putrid, moldy, rotting sheetrock and insulation and furniture and cockroaches, you name it, they were there. And so our job was to literally bring all that stuff out of these houses to the street, and they would come and pick that up. And then I guess the next year, and the next phase of that effort would be then the rebuilding. But you had to tear down first to get to that point. So after the successes of Kenya, actually, the word did get out. We were published in the Rutgers magazine and a bunch of other places, and somebody from the Peace Corps that was working in El Salvador reached out to us and contacted us saying, hey, we heard about your chapter. We'd really want to see if you'd be interested in helping us design and implement a walking bridge to span across this river down in El Salvador. Unfortunately, when the rainy season happens, it pretty much divides a community. And so you have the school on one side of the river and a lot of the community on the other side. So these school children don't have easy access to get to school during the rainy season, which is about half the year. So it affects a lot of the community. So she invited us down during spring break and to take measurements, meet the community, and at least start phase 1 of the project. So we went ahead, we went down there, and again, because we didn't have a whole lot of direction as a young organization, we didn't exactly know what to do when we got down there. So we did have a couple of civil engineers on our team where they took some soil samples and we're trying to figure out what kind of footings would be needed to hold up a bridge to cross this span. It was a pretty sizable span. But unfortunately, we just didn't have the experience. And once I graduated, that the project unfortunately did fizzle out a little bit, just because we didn't have any professional engineers helping us with the design. We didn't really have any mentorship. So unfortunately, that was our first, failure as an organization. But from that, we really blossomed. From what I understand, you guys have done Thailand and gone abroad and just really took off. So with every failure, I think you learn as an organization, and I think that's exactly what you guys did.
So the Thailand project was started in 2007 by an organization. It was called Warm Heart. It was their first contacted, reached out to International Borders to see if we had any interest in getting involved in this project. The project was originally it was for a small community of 143 households in Nong Bua, Thailand, which is a small, very small community in northern Thailand, north of Chiang Mai, and located in the Prao district. The community was pretty impoverished. Average, income was about $1,200 a year, and a lot of their money was going towards their water system. And the water system was a traditional drinking water treatment system. Its source was a well. It went up to an aeration system, had a detention basin, then was brought over to elevated storage tanks, where it was eventually brought out to the community. But there was problems with iron and manganese in the water, and pretty often the pipes would just get completely clogged, and they would have to replace them every few months. So it was becoming very expensive for the community. And it was also a problem because when the water got to the taps of the individual households, there was a lot of particles in it. And when a person sees brown particles in their water, they're not really as interested in drinking it. So they would end up buying water and then supplementing their drinking water in other ways. So we were brought in by Warm Heart to do that, and the first project lead was a gentleman named Ron Friedlander. We ended up doing our first assessment trip in the summer of 2008. So it was a 6-week trip. During the trip, we did not have there weren't any requirements from International Borders at the time for a project mentor. So it was just a group of 4 students from Rutgers. And while we were there, we actually went around and surveyed the whole community. We went to neighboring water systems throughout the community and kind of got a feel of how their systems were run, so we can get an idea of how best to implement a change. And then we also spent some time helping Warm Heart out because they were just launching their NGO. So after we got back, Ron graduated. I was lucky enough to take over as project lead, a co-lead with David Powell. And from there, we started kind of planning, maybe doing an implementation, but we didn't think we really had enough information. So we decided to plan another assessment trip. We obtained a mentor, and we did another assessment trip in the summer of 2009 for 4 weeks. And during that time, we started to kind of understand the system a little bit more. And there was a point where we realized that the aeration system had this big tarp over it, which wasn't really allowing proper aeration. So the tarp was removed, and And then that actually was really good at aiding in the metal sedimentation. So then from there, we came back and we realized when we looked at the test results, there was bacteria in the water. So that kind of created a whole different issue. And at that point, Liz Szilagyi took over the project because I went and studied abroad. And she ended up working with another professional mentor from CDM Smith, Terry Cole, I think is her name, and they worked on shock chlorinating the entire system to remove the bacteria. And then they added in a hypochlorinator at the very end, so when it comes out of the elevated storage tanks, it would go through that before it goes to the community.
So the Guatemala project in Nueva Santa Catarina Ixtahuacan, or NSCI as we call it for short, was destroyed by mudslides due to Hurricane Mitch in 1998. At that time, the community moved to a higher location in the mountains, and a nonprofit organization and the government collaborated to build a water supply system for the community. When the original system was built, the pumps were sized incorrectly, and there was also no transfer of knowledge to the community, so nothing was being maintained. So the system was not operational for very many years. It failed, and the community was without a functional water supply system for several years before reaching out to Engineers Without Borders USA. The Rutgers chapter got matched with the community and a local nonprofit in Guatemala, Appropriate Technologies Collaborative. Over the course of 3 assessment trips, the Rutgers chapter got introduced to the community, got a better understanding of the community's concerns and needs for the system, did water quality sampling. In this assessment process, the chapter did an alternatives analysis, working with the community to take into consideration their preferences. The alternatives analysis involved different ways to provide water to the community, looking at either different sources or using the same source in the existing infrastructure but sizing new pumps. Ultimately, the source water at Polka Springs was far and away the cleanest option available to the community, and the option selected by the community and the chapter to move forward with was sizing new pumps, replacing the pumps, and using the existing infrastructure. On the first assessment trip in March 2011, a memorandum of understanding was signed. The second implementation trip in August 2011 saw the installation of the new pumps and attempted start with the system. Unfortunately, at that point, the pipeline actually failed because it had been experiencing corrosion in the years in which it had been installed, and because it had been damaged, it wasn't able to withstand the pressure from the new system. Officially, the implementation phase was finished at that point because we had achieved the original scope of the project, which is to install new pumps for the system, etc. However, it still wasn't a functional water supply system, so the project was far from over. The community hired a local contractor, and the chapter reviewed and made recommendations for the plans to rehabilitate the pipeline. And in January 2013, the pipeline was still under construction, and the chapter traveled and walked the length of the pipeline, made further recommendations in the form of a punch list for the contractor, also worked with the community to discuss their priorities moving forward. Finally, in July 2013, construction was completed and the system started up.
So when I became project lead my junior year, we were at that time planning to travel over that winter break, January 2014, and we were gearing up for a trip that would monitor the status of the water supply system We were really excited because the pump system had just started up that summer before I became project lead. And we were going to be assessing for a potential disinfection project. And that was kind of the focus that we had, the disinfection project. We were doing a lot of research, and we were, putting together an alternatives analysis with disinfection alternatives. And we were really excited about potentially doing filtration. That was kind of the preferred alternative. And then getting closer to the trip, we thought, when we were trying to define our goals for the trip, we had heard reports of the pump system not working as intended because water was still not reaching the households. And at the time, we didn't know why, but we were still focused on the disinfection. And we, I guess, took a second look and realized that there wasn't much community interest in disinfection. There was only a small percentage of the community interested in filtration, as far as we knew at that point. So we thought it might be best to refocus and delay the trip. So then we ended up pushing the trip back to the following summer. We asked a lot of questions to our, community engineer. We talked to the water committee a lot, and we tried to figure out what the problem was. And we came to the conclusion that it seemed like there was leaking somewhere in the gravity pipeline from the pump station to the head tank in the community. So we tried to come up with a plan for when we traveled, how to figure out where the leaks were, what the leaks were, and how to fix them.
So the second trip, the main purpose of us going on the second trip was to investigate the gravity pipeline. We knew that there was leaks somewhere in the pipeline. We weren't sure exactly where. So we ended up walking that entire stretch of pipeline with members of the water committee, and they would tell us where they've experienced ruptures in the pipeline, or if there's been breaks due to farming, breaks due to pressure, different things like that. We noted it all down. But one of the most important takeaways from that trip was realizing that water wasn't getting from the head tank to the households within the community. So that was something that we weren't prepared for. So it was kind of reassessing everything and trying to figure out, okay, how can we go about figuring out this problem? And I think on that trip, we were a little bit ill-equipped to handle it right then. But as soon as we got back, that was what we've been working on from then on, okay, now we know that this is the main problem. What can we do about helping them fix it?
And in July of 2013, there was a system startup. So now enough water is getting to a tank in the community that should give 24-hour water access to all the families in the community. It's just that now we're discovering a problem from this tank in the community to people's houses, and that's where our project currently is focused.
Yeah, that's the distribution system, what we call internal distribution system. We believe that we have leaks. We don't really want to go all around the town and start digging everywhere. So we're trying to come out with a system or with a way in which we can try to localize the spots where the leaks are and just dig in these areas instead of digging all around the town.
The long-term goal of the project is 24-hour water access for all families in the Nueva Santa Catarina Ixtahuacan. And of course, since this is an engineers led borders project, in a sustainable manner. So we want the government to be on board, we want families to be paying monthly fees to pay the electricity of the pumps, and we want water meters installed to be monitoring the use of water for each family. So we want 24-hour water access in a sustainable manner. That's our long-term goal.
We want people to pay for what they use, as it happens in the US and more countries.
So, I joined EWB in 2010 when I came to Rutgers from County College of Morris. And at that point, the project was in its second or third year. And Kajal Patel was the project lead at the time. So she had been with the project. She was there from the very beginning when it got started in 2007, 2008. So this project came from Kalunjay, Kenya, from an NGO called ECODS, and they submitted an application to EWB at that time to get a new project. And their hopes and dreams at that point were a large water supply project with a distribution system and multiple storage locations throughout the community, which at the time they didn't know was upwards of 7,000 people. So they took that project and they rolled with it, and they said, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to build a water supply and distribution system for this entire community, Kalinje, which was comprised of 7 villages. And the construction cost at that time was estimated at around $250,000. So unfortunately, I wasn't traveling at the time, but Kajal and the rest of the project team went on the first assessment trip. And what they did is they met with the community for the first time and walked the whole community, which is big, several square miles. And they mapped out the community, where were, the water locations, where were the wells, where were the springs, where were the rivers, if there were any. And that was kind of a community building trip for them. And from there, they also took some water quality samples and, mapped out the community. So when we got home, we could kind of look at things from a broader view. And still at this point, I wasn't there yet, but in 2010, when I arrived, they went on their second assessment trip. And during this assessment trip, they did some more investigations on, okay, where do we want to start drilling? Where do we want to put this well? They built more relationships, took more water quality samples, and kind of tried to focus their efforts. And after that, in 2010, when they came home from the assessment trip, we kind of had a shift in the scope of the project, and people realized this is way too big of a task for this small group of kids, and we need to really truly focus this project from like a $250,000 massive water distribution project to something feasible, something sustainable for this community, and in a location that really needed the most, needed water the most. Where was the most need? So what we did is we kind of stepped back and we took some time. I think it was about 1.5 years between traveling, where we said, okay, we're not going to build this huge project. We're just going to focus on one well. And we did some research. We said, okay, where were the largest populations? Where were the least amount of water sources? And we used the data that we had at the time. And with this data, we isolated Maranga as our community. And the location was a school in Maranga. It was actually the location of 2 schools and also a hospital. We said, hey, we can supply, in a very close proximity, water to a lot of students and a lot of sick people and a lot of local residents. And this was the best choice for us. And at the same time, this was on a piece of land that they could own. This was school property. It wasn't owned by the government or another agency. It was their land. So felt really good about this location, and we, over several months of communicating and doing more research abroad, we kind of decided, all right, we're going to develop this location. And at that point, we said, okay, are we going to move forward for implementation or another assessment trip? And there was definitely a lot of drama that went into that decision, but ultimately we decided to implement on this location.
So the first trip that I was on with the Kenya team was the trip in August 2013. We went to Kenya in order to go assess for rainwater catchment at a couple of schools and also drill a well. So the main focus there was to drill a well at 2 schools in Maranga, which is a small rural community in Kenya. So we went there and we had 2 potential spots for a borehole lined up. We went there with our hydrogeologist. She showed us the spots, and then we brought in the drill crew. They came after a few days. It was delayed, but once they got there, they started drilling. The drilling took about 3 days total. We drilled to a final depth of 160 meters. Once we were at 160 meters, we found that there was actually no water under the ground where we thought that there was. Going back over the results later, it showed that where we thought there was water, it was really just wet clay, and they show up the same on the test. So it's hard to know until you actually drill a hole in the ground. So after looking at those results, we decided to go back, do more assessments for more holes. We got a new hydrogeologist who surveyed 3 different sites. And what he found is that really there wasn't a better chance of getting water anywhere nearby than where we were already. He suggested drilling another borehole in that school compound. So we had to go back to the community, sit down with them, and weigh their options. So we could either do a rainwater catchment installation somewhere in the community, or we could drill a new borehole. But the borehole was uncertain and would cost a lot of money, and we just had one failed well, so we weren't very certain in what the outcome would be. So after sitting down with the community, they came back to us and told us that they wanted to drill a borehole. We told them, if you're willing to front about 5 to 10% of the cost, then that's fine, we'll drill the borehole. And quickly they came back to us and said, we're kidding, we would really like to do the rainwater catchment. So with the rainwater catchment in mind, we went to 2 schools, the primary school and secondary school where we were already. We assessed those schools for rainwater catchment, and then we went to another smaller community in Lunga in the same overall community in Moringa, and we went there and we were able to look at a school there and assess that for rainwater catchment. And we also did groundwater surveys for a potential hand well somewhere else in the community. So we actually ended up doing the well survey in the backyard of one of the chairmen of the boards, the water board, local water board. In his backyard, we did the survey because he kind of swindled some of our members into thinking that that would be a good spot for a borehole, even though it really wouldn't benefit the community, it would benefit him mainly. So we had to, once we got back, we decided that was the best idea and went ahead with the rainwater catchment idea.
Last trip happened over the winter of 2014 to 2015, and there was an implementation trip. So our project is a water supply project, and it mainly focused on rainwater catchment systems and distribution. So over the course of the trip we went on, we actually implemented those systems. So many feet of gutters, new storage tanks, plastic storage tanks for water, and we also did some repairs on old ferrocement tanks.
Right, and basically what we want to focus on was making sure that we implement what the community wants. That was our #1 goal, making sure that this water supply project always fit their needs. So when we got there, we made sure to hire supplies from there, made sure it was readily accessible, and we, even through the contractor we hired, we made sure that everything that they did was fit to our standards.
So we want to travel at the end of this year between December 25th and January 18th for a 3-week trip. We're going to start by monitoring the rainwater catchment systems that were built in the past trip, but we want to eventually expand the project into multiple directions related back to water supply and distribution, the original goals of the project.
So we're going to expand the project by looking in the 3 sub-villages in Kulunjay, Moringa, Lunya, and Magwar. And what we want to do is we have 3 main goals. Since we're completed with these rainwater catchment systems, we want to look at schools in those other 3 regions to see if they might need rainwater catchment systems. Another thing that we want to look at is there's a local women's well group, and they've been having success with finding water, and we want to help them with their distribution system and see if there are any issues that we can fix. Our third and largest goal is we want to go to Lunya and see if we can drill a well and take the project back to its original scope of drilling a borehole and distributing water from there.
So when I joined the Canada project, it was my freshman year. It was back in 2012, and we were working on repairing a rain barrel collection system for a community garden in Camden. A woman named Mary Ellen had reached out to us, and she had trouble because she'd have to carry water multiple blocks from fire hydrant from a fire department who would open the fire hydrant for in buckets to water a garden regularly. So she reached out to us, and we had built her a system. The system, due to hurricane and winter conditions, had begun to were down, so there were problems with it. So what we were trying to do is fix it up. We made one trip fixed up, but there was another problem after we fixed it up that we didn't know because you can only test so many things at once. So at the end of my freshman year, we tested that first system. After we tested that first system, we found there's still problems, and we were going to continue fixing them until everything was good and ready. But early in my sophomore year, when I was project lead, we found out that the buildings across the street had a fire and that dangerous individuals had moved into those buildings, which was a huge roadblock for us. And upon talking to Mary Ellen, she felt that she didn't feel safe working in that area anymore. So we essentially, at that time, weren't even sure if we would continue the project. However, some individuals we had met with earlier during the last trip, we were able to get in contact with after a month or two, and they were also working on community gardens. So we were able to move forward on that and give them an entirely new rainbow catchment system.
After taking over the project from Alex Hobbs, who was the previous project lead, one of our initial goals was to begin the application process for turning our Camden project into an officially recognized domestic project. Prior to that year, Engineers Without Borders only dealt with international projects, but a lot of projects across, a lot of chapters across the country, professionally and student, were taking the initiative to work in local communities because they realized that there were needs nearby that our engineering services would definitely benefit. And so the Camden project was born in 2011, and we've been doing that sort of under the table in terms of what Engineers Without Borders was about before then. But after some of the work we had done, got more into the spotlight. Engineers Without Borders partnered with the American Society of Civil Engineers to start the Community Engineering Corps. That was in 2014. That is a branch of Engineers Without Borders that handles our domestic project. So we applied to them in hopes that we could then become officially recognized. We could present ourselves proudly as members of Engineers Without Borders, doing great things locally. We could have access to all the benefits that international projects have, like grants. We can use the name of Engineers Without Borders. That was one thing that took quite a while to get through. There's a lot of heavy paperwork we weren't used to, having been unofficial for a few years. But another thing that we were doing that year was reevaluating the rain barrel system we had put in the year previously, of which I was the technical lead for. What had happened over the summer was there was a heavy rainstorm that caused the rain barrels to topple over because we hadn't properly built a foundation system for it. We hadn't padded the ground, and the connections between the two barrels that we had implemented had actually broken because it wasn't flexible enough. So both systems had freedom to move, but because of that inflexible system, that connection broke. So that year, we made it a point to go back to the Beckett Street lots, repair the system that we had put in. We dug a solid stone foundation, we laid down gravel and masonry blocks, and we resealed all of the parts that had broken during the storm. And then we also talked to our community partners, Gus and Pedro, and reassessed other lots that they had planned to work on the same street. There's a small lot that we assessed that they actually want to build a freestanding rain barrel shed because we couldn't access the gutter systems of nearby buildings just because of the location. So that's a cool project that we're doing. They also want to increase the scope of their garden operation by implementing solar panels and irrigation systems, which is a great opportunity for our students to get into more technical work. And that's continuing. I wasn't able to see the project through last year, but that's what we're working on this year.
Sure. So this last trip to Camden was Saturday, October 17th, 2015. We went to assess our new lot in Camden. The new lot is across the street from a lot we were just worked on in May. In this lot, we plan to implement a new type of system, something that we haven't really done before. this lot is not adjacent to a building, so we can't run a gutter system from the roof to the rain barrels to collect water. Also, so we have to build a shed and use that roof from the shed to collect water. Also, we're planning to attach or have a pump in there as well so that we can pump water throughout the garden. We want to run pipe underground to make sure that the water gets to the whole lot. And the pump is going to be powered by a solar panel. So this lot is quite different from what we've done before.
So my experience in EWB has led to me becoming a better engineer.
It shows you the human side of engineers.
Ever since I started, it helped me grow as a person.
It really gives you a sense of the power of these engineering projects.
I'd say it was the friends I made here.
It's really more than just an extracurricular, it's about your worldview.
I think EWB changed my life completely. And I'm very grateful for it.
That gave me the confidence in what I was learning that, hey, maybe my education is going to amount to something, I'm going to be a great engineer.
EWB is Reeve for why I went into engineering school.
Leadership experience, I had team building experience, I had worldly experience, just so many traits that EWB will really just put on a person, whether they realize it or not.
So it made me not only feel like I was helping build another community, but being a part of it.
You appreciate the world a little more, I think. I definitely take shorter showers, I think.
I saw a lot of potential for the future of this chapter, and I wanted to be a part of that. I think Jessica Kretschik said it properly that I'm entering into a legacy of presidents, and I wanted to help continue that. I had a lot of goals and things that I saw that as I was vice president that I could bring to the presidency position and help this chapter get to basically a new level, kind of that level that a lot of other chapters in the region see us as.